I never expected that a simple act of neighborly kindness would completely change my life, but that's exactly what happened. Most of my days unfolded in a predictable, quiet rhythm, a cycle of work and solitude that I had curated myself. It wasn't a bad life, just a small one, lived within the four walls of my apartment and the digital space of my career. I was Lucas, a freelance transcriptionist, and the soundtrack to my life was mostly the clatter of my own keyboard and the low hum of the city outside my window. My world was ordered and calm. I worked from home, translating spoken words into text for legal and medical clients. It was a job that suited my temperament perfectly. I was an observer, a listener by trade and by nature. I found comfort in routine. The same coffee mug every morning, the same walk in the afternoon, the same rotation of quiet evenings with a book or a movie. It was a life built on a foundation of emotional self-protection, a fortress of solitude that kept me safe, but also kept me very much alone. I didn't realize how much I longed for something more until the silence was broken. It was broken by Caleb. He moved into the apartment next door, 3B, and his arrival was anything but quiet. It was a symphony of heavy furniture thudding against walls, loud, cheerful calls to his friends, and the persistent pulse of music that vibrated through our shared wall. He was, from my initial observations, my complete opposite. Where I was reserved, he was effusive. Where my space was silent, his was filled with life and noise. I'd see him in the hallway sometimes. He was tall, with broad shoulders that seemed almost too big for the narrow corridor. He had kind, crinkled eyes and a smile that appeared effortlessly, a shock of dark hair that was always a little messy, as if he'd just run his hands through it. He worked as a custom furniture maker, a carpenter, and he always seemed to carry the faint, pleasant scent of sawdust and would varnish with him. He'd offer a quick, booming "Hey, man," as he passed, and I'd give a small wave and a quiet hi in return. In my mind, he was a fixed point in another universe. The handsome, confident, and almost certainly straight neighbor. He was the kind of man I had learned long ago to admire from a safe distance, to categorize as unattainable and file away. He existed in a world of casual confidence and easy social graces that felt entirely foreign to my own. I would hear him through the wall, laughing with friends or working late in his small studio, and I would construct entire narratives about his life, a life full of friends and probably a girlfriend, a life that ran on a completely different track from mine. I was content, or so I told myself, to remain an anonymous observer. He was just a bit of color and noise in the periphery of my carefully managed world. He was the smell of sawdust in the hall, the low rumble of a bass line on a Saturday night. He was not, and could never be, a part of my actual life. That's what I believed. But life has a funny way of knocking on your door when you least expect it, sometimes literally. It has a way of taking the predictable, ordered world you've built and shaking it until all the pieces fall into a new, terrifying, and beautiful pattern. The inciting incident, the moment that fractured my routine, came on a Tuesday afternoon. It was raining, a steady, gray drizzle that matched my typical work-from-home mood. I was deep into transcribing a particularly dry deposition when I heard a strange, heavy thud from the hallway, followed by a sharp, pained curse that was unmistakably Caleb's. I hesitated for a moment, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. It was none of my business, right? People drop things. People curse. But something about the sound, the raw edge of pain in his voice, made me push my chair back. I opened my door a crack and peered out. Caleb was leaning against the opposite wall, his face pale and tight with pain. His left arm was cradled against his chest, but it was his right arm that was the problem. It was wrapped in a thick, pristine white cast that ran from his knuckles all the way up to his elbow. He was trying to pick up a dropped bag of groceries with his non-dominant hand, hissing in frustration as a carton of milk slipped from his grasp and rolled lazily down the hall. My ingrained caution told me to close the door. My sense of basic human decency, however, won out. I stepped into the hallway. "Hey," I said, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet space. "Are you all right? Do you need a hand?" Caleb looked up, and for the first time, I saw something other than easy confidence in his eyes. There was a flash of embarrassment, of frustration, of genuine vulnerability. "Oh, yeah? I mean, no? I'm fine," he said, trying for a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Just having a bit of a disagreement with gravity. He gestured with his chin towards his casted arm. Workshop accident. Stupid mistake. Blade kicked back. I knelt and gathered his escaped groceries, my hands feeling clumsy under his gaze. I picked up the milk carton and a scattered handful of apples. That looks serious, I said, handing the bag to him. He fumbled with it, trying to get a grip with his left hand. It's a broken wrist and a few fractured metacarpals. He sighed, finally managing to secure the bag against his hip. The doctor said I'm basically useless for 6 to 8 weeks. Can't work. Can't drive. Turns out you need 2 hands for, like, everything. He let out a short, humorless laugh. He looked exhausted. And then, he looked directly at me, his gaze direct and pleading. This was the moment. The request that would change everything. Look, I know this is a huge ask, he started, his voice dropping a little. We don't really know each other. But my family's all out of state, and my friends all have their own jobs. I was wondering. I mean, I can pay you, of course. But could you maybe help me out? Just for a couple of days? Until I can figure out a more permanent solution. Just with, basic stuff. Making food. Opening jars. That kind of thing. My internal monologue went into overdrive. My quiet life, my routine, my safe solitude, all of it was under threat. This meant letting someone in, not just into my schedule, but into my space. It meant unpredictability. It meant proximity to the man I had been carefully observing from a distance. Fear and a strange, unbidden flicker of hope warred within me. The cautious part of me screamed to make a polite excuse. But the look on his face, the raw vulnerability of a man who was clearly always the one in control, broke through my defenses. You don't have to pay me, I heard myself say, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. We're neighbors. Of course, I'll help. A wave of profound relief washed over his features, so visible it was almost tangible. Really? Oh man. Thank you. Seriously. You're a lifesaver. The smile he gave me then was genuine, and it was dazzling. It was the first time that smile was directed fully at me, and it felt like turning on a light in a dark room. My carefully constructed fortress had just been breached, not with a bang, but with a simple, desperate request for help. And as I followed him into his apartment, an apartment that smelled of fresh paint and sawdust, I had a terrifying and exhilarating feeling that nothing would ever be the same. The first few days were an exercise in awkward choreography. His apartment was a mirror image of mine, but it felt entirely different. It was a space in progress, with drop cloths on the floor, cans of paint in the corner, and stacks of beautiful, raw lumber leaning against a wall. It was a space full of potential, much like the man himself. My role was simple, yet intimate. I became, in essence, his right hand. I made him coffee in the morning, my hands moving with a strange self-awareness as he watched me from his armchair. I opened jars of pasta sauce, cut up vegetables for a salad, and wrestled with stubborn packaging. Each small task was a study in closeness. I had to lean over him to place a plate on the coffee table, our shoulders sometimes brushing. I had to stand beside him at the counter, our arms inches apart as I sliced an apple for him. These were the moments my brain latched onto, replaying them in a loop, analyzing the accidental touches for any hidden meaning. He was embarrassed at first, constantly apologizing for his helplessness. I feel like a toddler, he grumbled one afternoon as I helped him button his shirt, my fingers fumbling with the small plastic discs so close to his chest. I could feel the warmth radiating from his skin, and I tried to keep my breathing even. Don't worry about it, I said, focusing intently on the task. It's temporary, but secretly, a part of me didn't want it to be. This forced proximity was a kind of terrifying gift. It was cracking open the door to his world, and I found myself wanting to peek inside. It was during these simple, domestic moments that I began to see past the confident, extroverted persona. I discovered the real Caleb, the one who existed behind the easy smile and the loud music. One evening, while I was cleaning up after the simple dinner I'd prepared, I noticed a series of framed sketches on his wall. They were incredibly detailed, architectural drawings of intricate, almost fantastical-looking chairs and tables. The lines were precise, elegant, and full of imagination. Did you draw these? I asked, running my fingers lightly over one of the frames. He looked over from the couch, a flicker of that same vulnerability I'd seen in the hallway crossing his face. "Oh yeah? A while ago. Just ideas I mess around with." He looked down at his casted hand and sighed. "It's the thing I miss the most. More than the work, even. Just being able to hold a pencil." In that moment, he wasn't just the handsome, capable carpenter from next door. He was an artist, a creator, frustrated and sidelined by his injury. This revelation of vulnerability was a powerful hook. It made him seem less like an archetype and more like a person, a complex and thoughtful man whose passion was currently locked away from him. It deepened my attraction in a way that his physical presence alone never could. It made him real. The small, significant moment that shifted everything happened on the third day. He had been quiet all afternoon, a kind of melancholy settling over him. He was staring out the window, his good hand clenching and unclenching on the arm of his chair. He hated being idle. I could see it was eating away at him. "Hey," I said softly, not wanting to startle him. "Is everything okay?" He turned to me, his expression clouded. I feel so useless. I'm used to building things, fixing things. Now I can't even open a bottle of water without help." I didn't know what to say, so I just went to the kitchen and got him a bottle of water. I twisted the cap off and handed it to him. As he took it, his fingers brushed against mine. It was nothing, a fleeting, accidental touch. But neither of us pulled away immediately. My skin tingled where he had touched me. I looked up and my eyes met his. For a fraction of a second, the air between us grew thick and charged. The sounds of the city outside seemed to fade away. It was just a glance, a moment of shared stillness, but it felt like a confession. It was the first time I felt that my hope wasn't entirely a one-sided fantasy. Something had passed between us, an unspoken acknowledgement that this was more than just a neighbor helping another neighbor. And in the ensuing silence, a new kind of tension began to build, a tension full of unspoken questions and terrifying possibilities. The turning point, the instant where the entire dynamic of our relationship was rewritten, arrived a week into my role as his caregiver. It didn't happen in a grand, cinematic fashion. It happened in the quiet intimacy of his bathroom, a small, sterile space made humid and warm by the steam from the shower. Caleb had been trying to manage his own hygiene, but washing his hair with one hand while keeping his cast dry was proving to be an impossible, frustrating task. After I heard a bottle clatter to the shower floor for the third time, followed by a deeply frustrated sigh, I knocked on the door. "Caleb, do you need some help?" I asked, my voice tentative. There was a long pause. "Yeah," he finally said, his voice muffled and laced with defeat. "I think I do." He was sitting on a small plastic shower stool, shirtless, with a towel draped over his lap. His hair was damp and messy. He looked up at me, his expression a mixture of acute embarrassment and gratitude. "I feel ridiculous," he muttered, not meeting my eyes. "Don't," I said, my voice softer than I intended. "Just lean your head back." I picked up the shampoo bottle, my heart thumping a nervous rhythm against my ribs. The space felt impossibly small. I could see the fine muscles in his shoulders and back, the scattering of freckles across his skin. The air was thick with the clean scent of his soap and the warm, human smell of him. I squeezed a dollop of shampoo into my palm and began to work it into his hair. My fingers moved slowly, carefully, massaging his scalp. He let out a soft, involuntary sound, a sigh of pure relief, and let his head rest more heavily against my hands. I felt the tension drain from his shoulders. Under my touch, he was completely pliant, completely vulnerable. It was one of the most intimate acts I had ever performed. I wasn't just washing his hair. I was caring for him in a way that felt deeply personal, crossing a boundary we hadn't even known was there. When I was done, I wrapped a towel around his head and helped him stand. The charged silence from the other day returned, but now it was amplified, thick with the memory of my hands in his hair. The rest of the evening passed in a haze of this new awareness. We ate dinner, we watched a movie, but the space between us on the couch felt electric. Every accidental brush of our arms was a jolt. Later that night, the real moment came. He had been prescribed some simple physical therapy exercises to keep the fingers of his injured hand from getting stiff and to maintain mobility in his shoulder. He was struggling to do one of them, an exercise that required him to stretch his arm across his body. "I can't get the angle right," he said, his voice tight with frustration. "It just hurts." "Here," I said, moving from my end of the couch to sit on the floor in front of him. Let me help. Show me what the physical therapist did. He explained the movement, and I gently took his good hand to guide his injured arm. The position required me to be between his legs as he sat on the couch, my body close to his. My focus was entirely on the careful, precise movement of his arm, on watching his face for any sign of pain. We were so close I could feel his breath on my hair. Okay, now you're supposed to hold it for 30 seconds, he said, his voice suddenly husky. We held the position, locked in a strange, therapeutic embrace. The only sound was the ticking of the clock on the wall and the soft sound of our own breathing. The 30 seconds stretched into an eternity. When the time was up, I started to pull away, but he didn't let go of my hand. His grip was light but firm. Wait, he whispered. I looked up at him, and the expression in his eyes stole the air from my lungs. It was raw, open, and full of a desperate question. The carefully constructed walls of neighborly assistance and polite distance crumbled into dust. He used his good hand to gently tilt my chin up. He leaned down, closing the small gap between us. The world seemed to slow down, to narrow to this single point in time. He closed the curtains on the world outside with a soft flutter of his eyelids. Then, he whispered, the words a warm breath against my skin, knees between mine. It wasn't a command, but a confirmation, a way of grounding us in the undeniable reality of the moment. I shifted slightly, my body settling into the space he had named. And then he kissed me. It wasn't a tentative, questioning kiss. It was deep and sure, a release of all the unspoken tension that had been building between us for days. It was a kiss full of frustration and longing and a breathtaking, terrifying hope. In that one moment, everything changed. The question had been asked and answered. There was no going back. We had crossed the line, and on the other side, the landscape of our lives was forever altered. The aftermath of the kiss was a deafening silence. As soon as our lips parted, the electrifying connection seemed to short-circuit, replaced by a thick, suffocating awkwardness. Caleb pulled back as if he'd touched a hot stove, his eyes wide and unreadable. He wouldn't look at me. He just stared at the opposite wall, his jaw tight. A dark blush crept up his neck. I shouldn't have done that, he stammered, his voice rough. I'm sorry. It's the pain meds. They make me not think straight. Every word was a small, sharp blow. The pain meds. The classic, cowardly excuse. My soaring hope plummeted and crashed. I felt my own face flush with a mixture of humiliation and disappointment. I had allowed myself, for one brief, glorious moment, to believe this was real, that the connection I felt was mutual. Now, it was being dismissed as a pharmaceutical side effect. It's fine, I said, my own voice sounding thin and distant. I scrambled to my feet, suddenly desperate for space, for the safety of my own apartment. Don't worry about it. I should go. It's getting late. I didn't wait for a response. I practically fled his apartment, the sound of the door clicking shut behind me feeling like a final, definitive end to whatever might have been. Back in the sterile silence of my own home, the internal analysis began. It was a vicious, relentless cycle of thoughts. I replayed the kiss over and over again in my mind, trying to dissect it frame by frame. The way he had looked at me before leaning in, the soft whisper of his words, the surprising confidence of his touch. It hadn't felt like a mistake. It hadn't felt like something caused by medication. It had felt intentional, real, and deeply desired. But his immediate regret, his clumsy excuse, contradicted everything I had felt. My mind was a courtroom, with hope and fear as the opposing attorneys. Hope would present the evidence, the lingering touches, the shared glances, the vulnerability he'd shown me, the intensity of the kiss itself. It was a compelling case. He felt something. He had to. Then fear would take the stand, methodical and cruel. It would cross-examine every piece of evidence. The lingering touches? Just accidents born of proximity. The shared glances? My own wishful thinking, projecting meaning onto nothing. The vulnerability? A natural consequence of his injury, not a special intimacy reserved for me. And the kiss? A moment of weakness, a confused impulse from a man in pain and on medication. Something he clearly regretted the moment it was over. The next few days were excruciating. The easy routine we had fallen into was shattered. I still went over to help him, bound by my promise, but the atmosphere was thick with unspoken tension. We moved around each other with a new, charged carefulness, like two dancers who had forgotten the steps to their routine. We avoided eye contact. Our conversations were clipped and strictly functional. Do you need anything from the store? Can you help me with this jar? The warmth was gone, replaced by a polite, chilly distance that was 1,000 times worse than the silence before we ever really spoke. He seemed to be retreating further into himself, his earlier melancholy now mixed with a palpable layer of guilt. He was quiet, withdrawn. For my part, I was a wreck. I was living a double life. On the outside, I was the calm, helpful neighbor. On the inside, I was a storm of anxiety and longing. Every moment in his presence was a fresh wave of torture. I was so close to what I wanted, yet it felt more unattainable than ever. I questioned everything. Had I misread the entire situation from the very beginning? Was I just a convenient pair of hands, a temporary solution to a practical problem? The kiss, which should have been a beginning, now felt like a definitive, painful end. I was caught in a miserable limbo, suspended between the hope of what I had felt and the crushing reality of his apparent regret. The tension stretched for 3 agonizing days. 3 days of polite fictions and studiously avoided gazes. I was on the verge of making an excuse, of telling him I couldn't help anymore, just to save myself from the slow torment of it all. I was washing the dishes in his sink on the 3rd night, my back to him, when he finally broke the silence. "Lucas, can we talk?" His voice was quiet, hesitant, but it cut through the sound of the running water and straight to my core. I turned off the tap, dried my hands on a towel, and turned to face him. My heart felt like it was trying to beat its way out of my chest. He was sitting in his usual armchair, but he wasn't leaning back. He was perched on the edge of the seat, his good hand twisting a loose thread on the upholstery. He looked nervous, more nervous than I had ever seen him. "Listen," he began, finally looking up and meeting my eyes. The guilt and anxiety were plain on his face. "I am so sorry for how I've been acting, and for what I said the other night." He took a deep breath. "It wasn't the pain meds. That was a stupid, cowardly thing to say." I panicked. I just stood there, my mind racing, not daring to let hope bloom just yet. I had been hurt enough. I simply waited for him to continue, my expression carefully neutral. "The truth is," he said, his voice dropping even lower, "I've wanted to do that for a while now. Pretty much since you started helping me. Maybe even before that." He let out a shaky laugh. "I used to hear you through the wall, your keyboard tapping away, and I'd wonder about you. You were so quiet, and I was always making a racket. I wanted to talk to you, to actually get to know you, but I didn't know how." This was the revelation, the secret that recontextualized everything. He hadn't just been the loud neighbor. He had been the curious one. "I've never, he gestured vaguely between us. "I've never been with a guy before. I've never even really let myself think about it. But then you were here, in my space, being so kind, and it became impossible to ignore." He looked down at his cast. "When I kissed you, it was the first time in my life I've ever done something that felt completely honest. And it terrified me. The moment it was over, my brain just went into self-destruct mode. I was scared of what you would think. I was scared of what I was thinking. So I pushed you away. And I've regretted it every second since." He stood up and walked slowly toward me, his eyes searching mine for a reaction. "I get it if you're angry, or if you just want me to leave you alone. But I had to tell you the truth. What I felt in that moment was real, Lucas. And it's the realest thing I've felt in a very long time." The dam of my own carefully guarded emotions finally broke. All the anxiety, the fear, the hurt, it all washed away, replaced by a wave of profound, overwhelming relief. I thought I imagined it. I whispered, the words thick with emotion. I thought I had made it all up. A small, hopeful smile touched his lips. "You didn't imagine anything." He was standing right in front of me now, so close I could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. He gently reached out with his good hand and cupped my cheek, his thumb stroking my skin. Can we try that again? Without the panic and the stupid excuses?" I didn't need to answer with words. I leaned in and met him halfway. This kiss was different from the first. The first had been born of tension and release. This one was a mutual acknowledgement, a confirmation. It was gentle at first, a question and an answer, and then it deepened, becoming confident and sure. It was a promise. It was the start of something new, built not on a misunderstanding or an accident, but on a foundation of honest, vulnerable truth. The silence that followed this time wasn't awkward or tense. It was comfortable, peaceful, and filled with the promise of a future I had never dared to imagine. In the weeks that followed our confession, the world seemed to recalibrate itself around us. The awkward tension evaporated, replaced by an easy, comfortable intimacy that felt both thrillingly new and wonderfully familiar. Caleb's cast, once a symbol of his frustrating dependence, became a strange kind of catalyst for our connection. We learned the geography of each other's lives in the small, domestic spaces of our neighboring apartments. My quiet, solitary world expanded to include his warmth and laughter, and his chaotic, in-progress space found a new center of gravity in our shared moments. His arm healed slowly but steadily. First, the heavy cast was replaced by a lighter splint, and then, finally, by nothing at all. I watched him regain his strength and independence with a mixture of pride and a small, selfish pang of nostalgia for the time when he had needed me so completely. But our connection wasn't based on that need anymore. It had been the key that opened the door, but what we found inside was something far more substantial and enduring. We went on our first official date the week after his cast came off. He took me to a small, hidden restaurant he loved, and then we walked for hours through the quiet city streets, our hands clasped together. There was no more fear, no more hesitation. He talked about his dreams for his furniture business, the intricate designs he saw in his mind. I talked about the stories I heard in my transcription work, the little dramas and comedies of other people's lives that I was a silent witness to. We were two observers, in our own way, finally sharing our observations with each other. There was a moment, a few months later, that perfectly bookended the start of our story. I came home from a walk to find him in my kitchen, attempting to open a particularly stubborn jar of olives. He was struggling, grunting with effort, a playful, exaggerated look of frustration on his face. He saw me standing in the doorway and put the jar down, a slow grin spreading across his face. He walked over to me, wrapped his arms around my waist, and pulled me close. "I can't open it," he whispered, his voice a low rumble against my ear. "I think I need some help." I laughed, the sound full and happy in the quiet of my apartment. I leaned up and kissed him, a deep, lingering kiss full of the comfortable certainty of being loved. The jar of olives sat on the counter, completely forgotten. We didn't need a crisis or an excuse to be close anymore. Our closeness had become our natural state of being. It's funny how life works, isn't it? You can spend years building walls to protect yourself, curating a life of quiet safety, only to find that true safety, true happiness, lies in the terrifying, wonderful vulnerability of letting someone else in. My life used to be a monologue, a steady, predictable rhythm of one. Now, it's a conversation, a duet. It's the sound of his laughter mixing with mine, the scent of sawdust and coffee in the morning, the comfortable weight of his head on my shoulder as we watch a movie on the couch. A broken bone and a hesitant request for help didn't just change my routine. They opened my life to a love I had believed was meant for other people. It turns out, all I had to do was be brave enough to open the door.